all our lives are a tapestry, and we all have different threads and different knots on the back. But the beautiful thing is there is a story to be told. Right? We want to tell those stories because sometimes they're not pretty, they're not easy to hear, they're not easy to tell. I'll tell you that, not easy to tell. And that's a good thing. They shouldn't be easy to tell sometimes. You know, I look at my story sometimes, and I just, you know, years later, still, I'm like, Lord, why does this have to be my story? And it's because God has He's got a ministry for us all, right? Different places of life. We all have a place that we have to be. The story we have to tell. So, y'all be praying. I'll be tapping you on the shoulder. Talk about your story, what God is doing. It's beautiful. It's a celebration, really, just talk about what our God does. And so, thank you, Britt, for doing that. Britt's a dear brother of mine, just a dear friend. I've watched his walk these last several years. He's a great friend of mine. We've vacationed together. We've spent countless hours together, and I see a light for Christ that I don't see in many men. I see his hunger for the lost, and if that's what it took for Jesus to get into the life of a man, then that's the story. You know? Okay, we're now going to continue our biblical leadership series. We're going to look at a very important topic here. We're going to talk about the importance as followers of Christ of our relational skills, the ability to relate with people. I don't know if you've noticed or not, but this is a challenge for a lot of people. And it's a challenge because I think a lot of times people haven't really spent a lot of time thinking about what do I need to do to keep becoming my best with people. You know, as followers of Christ, we're in the people business. We're in the business of loving people, talking to people, engaging people, listening to people, drawing into their lives. And it requires some skills to be able to do that well. And the Bible talks a lot about these skills. It gives us a lot of wisdom and what it is that God wants from us as leaders, as men who are following Christ. And so I want to show you just a few passages that kind of give some insights in these relational skills. You know, I used to ask people all the time, if you could make any class mandatory for high school seniors that's not currently mandatory, like what class would it be? I mean, we already got some that are mandatory, right? What class ought to be mandatory? Dave Carter, what class ought to be mandatory for all high school seniors before they graduate that's not already mandatory? What would you say?
Communication.
Okay, you knew where I was going. All right, that's the easy answer. Communication.
Wood shop.
Wood shop, yeah. There you go, that's nice. Yeah, what do you think, Reggie? Civics. Well, I guess there is government, but that's not working too good, is it? No, it's not doing too good. That's right. You might think personal finance, teach people how money works and how to manage, what's a credit card, and oh, wow, debt's bad, right? That might be mandatory, but I think communication skills, knowing how to get along with people, I think that ought to be a mandatory class because, you go into 12 years of school and you come out and you can hopefully read and write and do some math. But it's funny how you start bumping up against people and all of a sudden it's conflict, it's tension, it's I don't like this person, I can't get along with this person. And you end up meeting people who have such a narrow bandwidth of who they actually get along with that they're so easily bothered. You ever met them? They're so easily bothered by certain people and they don't know what to do with it. And so what they do is they just tend to just kind of avoid them, ignore them, minimize the conversation with them, and they just don't know how to love people. See, and so we want to talk about this. This is such an important area for us to be looking at. So let's look here at James chapter 1 very quickly. Just going to hit a few passages, okay? A few passages here. James chapter 1, beginning in verse 19. I want you to look at what James says. A little piece of wisdom here. My dear brothers and sisters, understand this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. I want you to notice this for a second. The first thing he says is we should be quick to listen. So as I spend time with people, what do I need to be good at? If you're going to be a great listener, what does that mean you have to do to be a great listener?
Shut up.
You got to shut up. You got to quit waiting for your turn to talk. You got to quit waiting for your turn to present yourself, to say what's on your mind, right? You need to be good at following up with questions and really taking an interest, and obviously sharing some things about yourself along the way, but take a real interest. You got to be able to pay attention. I got to tell you a great story because he's here. I got my good buddy Aaron down here at the end. I got to have breakfast with Aaron one morning, and we had a great visit, and Aaron challenged me one morning. He challenged me. He said, man, I felt like you were so distracted. And I had a dog over here, 2 kids behind me jumping around, and I'm just kind of like bouncing around. And man, I appreciated that feedback, because man, I got to be here with you, So we met again for lunch. I'm like, what's up, dude? He's like, why are you staring at me? But man, we need that, don't we? We need help with each other to be better in this area, And I try to do this. If you guys know me, I'm very big on giving and receiving feedback, helping a brother out, help me out, right? We need to help each other. So we got to be quick to listen. We need to be good at paying attention, taking an interest. I told my son Cooper, as he was getting ready to go off to college, I said, Cooper, it's always more important to be interested than it is to be interesting. Take the time, listen, ask questions, take an interest in other people. Can't tell you how many people are so bad at taking a real interest, an active interest in the people around them. They just don't know how to do it. And then, slow to speak. So speak, it doesn't say be mute. It's saying speak, but be wise, slow to speak. Don't jump in right away. Let this person finish their thought. I've been reading this book. I'm loving this book, by the way. Anybody ever heard of David Brooks by chance? Yeah, he's a conservative writer, writes for the New York Times, which might be an oxymoron for some of you guys, but he's a really great author, really great writer, and really his career has turned to writing a lot now about kind of the human condition, and he's written on character, he's written on the spiritual life, he's a believer, he's a brother, and he wrote this book called How to Know a Person, The Art of Seeing Others Deeply and Being Seen. It's a beautiful book. I highly recommend you guys to read it. I'm reading it, and I feel like this is an area that for me I've worked on a lot, and I'm pretty good, and I'm reading this book, and I'm feeling myself deeply moved and stirred and challenged to be even better, even sharper than I am. I want to read you just one little section here. This is on the chapter called The Epidemic of Blindness, and this is what he says. He says, depression rates have been surging since the beginning of the 21st century. Between 1999 and 2019, American suicide rates increased by 33%. Between 2009 and 2019, the percentage of teens who reported persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness rose from 26% to 37%. By 2021, it had shot up to 44%. The percentage of Americans who said they have no close friends quadrupled between 1990 and 2020. In one survey, 54% of Americans reported that no one knows them well. The number of American adults without a romantic partner has increased by a third. More to the point, 36% of Americans reported that they felt lonely frequently or almost all of the time. 36%. Including 61% of young adults and 51% of young mothers. People were spending much more time alone. In 2013, Americans spent an average of 6.5 hours per week with friends. By 2019, they were spending only 4 hours per week with friends, a 38% drop. By 2021, as the COVID-19 pandemic was easing, they were spending only 2 hours and 45 minutes per week with friends, a 58% decline. The General Social Survey asks Americans to rate their happiness levels. Between 1990 and 2018, the share of Americans who put themselves in the lowest happiness category has increased by over 50%. It's an epidemic. It's all around us. And a lot of times we just don't really see it. We don't think much about it. But it's everywhere. It's in every person you talk to. The chances are high. It's 1 in 2 that you're going to find somebody who's in a desperate need to be listened to be talked to. And that's who we're called to be. We're called to be people that are slow to speak, quick to listen, and let people feel seen when we're with them. You guys agree with that? That's part of our mission as being salt and light. Let me show you another one. Go to Philippians 2. Go to your left. Philippians 2. This is that beautiful section of Scripture, one of the most beautiful, clearest areas of Scripture about humility, about the condescension of Christ from heaven to earth, dying death on a cross, and God's glorification of Him. And look what he says here in verse 3, chapter 2, verse 3. Paul says this. He says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit. That word conceit literally means empty glory. All those things that we can't wait to tell somebody about ourselves, Paul ultimately says what about that? In the light of eternity, these things are empty conceits. Make it about the other person. All right, do nothing out of selfish ambition or empty conceit. In humility, consider others as more important than yourselves. Imagine this for a second. This is the image I get on this text. Imagine that you get to finally have lunch or dinner with that person that you have always admired, that you never thought you'd get to meet. It's your hero. It's the person that you so respect. You never thought you'd get to meet them, much less have a one-on-one lunch or dinner with them. Do you think you would spend the bulk of that time telling them all about you? How would you spend that time with them? What do you think?
Listening to them.
Curiosity. That's a great word. What's that? Listening to them. Would you ask them a few questions, Dean?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about this and tell me about that, and listening to them. That's what he's saying here. Consider others as more important than yourselves. When I'm with somebody that I think is more important than me, I have a natural tendency to just kind of listen and to not try to take over. See, when you feel like you're more important than others, it's easy just to kind of take over the conversation and just to kind of dominate the conversation. He goes, no, consider others as more important than yourselves. Everyone should look not to his own interests, but rather to the interests of others. So when you sit down and you have that breakfast, that lunch, you're in that meeting, considering the interests of others, this is what we're commanded to do. If I can brag once again, not because he did his testimony, but I think Britt Watson is one of the best at this. If you ever spend any time with Britt Watson, Britt will ask you a dozen questions, and he's sincere about them. He'll ask all about you and how you're doing and how's it going, and he'll listen with compassion. He'll put his big old paw on you sometimes and pray over you if he knows you're hurting, right? It's that sense of my interest in you is greater than my interest in me. And we need to get this into us, because I can tell you, as many people as I spend time with and I'm around, there is room to grow for all of us. Right? We all have room to grow. We all can do better. We can all be better at doing this. So, go to Colossians. Go back to your right. Colossians chapter 4. Colossians 4. Verses 5 and 6. This is what Paul says. He says, act wisely toward outsiders. It's a verb, peripateo. It's the idea of walking around. The idea is to actually move towards them. Act wisely towards others. Move towards them and be wise. Consider who they are and be wise in your conversation with them. Now, the context here is obviously the people who don't know the Lord. Take an interest and be wise. Who are you talking to? Understand them. Be wise in how you approach and talk to them. And then he says, Making the most of the time. Kairos. It's the occasion that you have. Make the most of that occasion. Don't take it for granted. You may not get it again. It may be the last time you speak to this person. There may be something going on in their life in that moment that what you have to say in that moment can make the biggest difference in that moment if you're wise and you think wisely in that moment. Don't take any moment too lightly. Take the time to listen, ask questions, speak slowly, meet them where they're at. And then he says, let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you should answer each person. The context that Paul's talking about is if they have difficulties or challenges with God or faith, it's like 1 Peter 3:15, always be prepared to give an answer for the faith that's within you with what? You remember what the next verse says? We always forget this part of the verse. With gentleness. How about that one? Not with harshness, not with the battering ram of truth, not with the dividing line that divides me from you, but with a seasoning, like with salt, a preservative. That I should be able to speak with you in such a way that there's something preservative about the way that I talk to you. Right? You ever meet those people that, man, God loved them. They're all in with the stake of truth. But man, they stink. And they know how to draw a line in the sand that divides relationships between people. And frankly, people just don't like being around this person. But they're all about the truth. And what Paul is saying, no, be ready to defend the truth. Don't sacrifice and compromise the truth. Know the truth. Look, I've spent, 42? I've spent 36 years of my Christian, I've been a Christian 36 years. By God's grace, I got a guy who began discipling me about 4 years after I came to faith. So for 32 years, he started me as a person who should begin pursuing and loving truth through study and learning and reading. So I guarantee you, over 3 decades of study and learning, I've read some things, I've studied some things. My problem is not truth. I've got more truth coming out of my ears over 30 years. What I have to focus on is the ability to sit in front and talk in such a way that I can speak with love and gentleness and let this person who's on the other side of me not feel a dividing wall between me and them. And that wasn't me in the beginning. I can assure you that. I was ready to put them up, right? I was like the lion of old, ready to fight the battle of truth. And man, I'd be on planes. I remember what, can I tell you that? I remember I was on a plane and we were flying to San Francisco. I was going to a theology conference and the plane was full of a bunch of people going to this theology, the Evangelical Theological Society conference. Well, exciting conference. It is a good conference. But anybody who's anybody in evangelicalism goes here. Every keynote speaker, every plenary speaker, every workshop speaker. It's the who's who of evangelicalism. They've written every book that we've read. And everybody's on this plane. And I remember sitting next to this lady, and she's like, I remember she was asking, where are you going? I'm like, oh, I'm going to a theology conference. Really? I said, yeah. And I just began to go into the gospel, and she wasn't really on board. And she wasn't going to the conference. And she just begins debating me. And man, I put her in every apologetic judo flip trick I could. And I'm making her look so, I said, what you just said is a contradiction. I mean, you just said this, now you're saying this. I remember that. Remember, I got her on the law of non-contradiction. That two statements saying the same thing that are opposite can't both be true. How can this be true if you just said this? That doesn't make any sense. You see? As if somehow my logic and walking her through the rational case is somehow going to get her to bow her heart to the Lord. Anyway, it was terrible. Now, at the time, I'm like, yeah, standing up for the Lord. Let's go, Walt! When I get done, there was a couple brothers behind me that were going to the conference. I remember they were older, wearing suits, of course. And as we're walking off the plane, one of them says, hey man, we heard you talking to the lady. Way to go. Way to go. I'm like, yeah, it's what I do. It's what I do. See? God, it's terrible. And yet they're listening to my conversation. And they're like, yeah, he's out logicking her. He'll show her. See? It's ridiculous. There's got to be a gentleness. There's got to be a wisdom with our words. Meet you where you're at. You guys agree with that? See, it takes patience. It takes wisdom. You've got to be able to sit across from somebody and just listen and sometimes pray. Help me, Lord. Help me to know what to say next. How do I navigate this? Maybe this isn't the time to have this conversation, right? Wisdom. Be smart, right? Let me show you another one. I love this one. Go to 1 Corinthians 9.
Walt, that always reminds me to edify. Also, that's what I have written down for that verse.
Do you? Yeah.
Just to love people, to lift them up, filling their heart with joy.
Chad,
And I love it when people do that to me.
yeah, well, you offer that to people. You offer that to people. You fill their heart with joy. And a lot of joy sometimes.
Too much.
Too much joy sometimes. But hey, if I'm going to err one way, I'm erring that way, right? I'm going to err that way.
Amen.
That's right. That's why I love you. But that's right. We're to edify. It's the idea. What's an edifice? An edifice is a building. The idea of edifying somebody is you build them up. You build them up. Look. If we can just put it this way, can you imagine if every time you ended up visiting with somebody, they felt valued, they felt heard, and they felt understood? Could you imagine the impact that would have? You ever just spend time with somebody and you didn't feel valued? You didn't really feel heard, and you didn't really feel understood? It's just, well, I'll never get that hour back. Can you imagine? As a believer, we should do that. And listen, and I'm not just saying this. We are not good at this. We fall into bad habits. We get lazy with our communication. We get lazy with how to love people when we talk to them. All of us. And we've got to put on the mind of Christ. We must be intentional with how we communicate with people and how we see them and how we talk to them. Okay? It just, honestly, over time, forget it. Let's keep going. Verse 19. Look what Paul says here. Although, by the way, if you notice, Paul has a lot to say about communication in all of his epistles. You know why? What's Paul doing all the time? He's communicating. He's building bridges. He's sharing the truth, but he's trying to do it in love. Look at his speeches to when he's talking to Festus and Felix and to King Agrippa. Look at the way he talks to these people. He's so smart. He doesn't create any unnecessary barriers between me and you. Look what he says in verse 19. He says, although I am free from all and not anyone's slave, I had made myself a slave to everyone in order to what? To win more people. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win Jews. To those under the law, like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, to win those under the law. To those who are without the law, like one without the law, though I am not without God's law, but under the law of Christ, to win those without the law. See that? To win, to win, to win, to win. You get his goal? Winning. You're going to win so much, you're going to get tired of winning. Verse 22, look at this. To the weak, I became weak. In order, what? To win the weak. I become all things to all people so that I may be by every possible means, so that I may by every possible means save some. Now I do all this because of the gospel, so that I may share in the blessings. What is Paul saying? What's Paul's MO when he's with people? That's the goal.
Grace.
And he's saying, I'm going to see who I'm sitting in front of, who I'm standing in front of, and I'm going to be in a certain way without compromise. I'm going to be what they are in such a way that they can relate to me, that I can relate to them and they can relate to me. There's a versatility to Paul. He's not a one-trick pony. He's not a one-dimensional guy. He's a guy that can shift into any gear he needs to shift into. You want to go to Epicurean and Stoic thought? Paul will shift into that gear. You want to go into Christian living? He'll go into that gear. Paul can weep. Paul can have joy. Paul can shift into any gear he needs to shift into whenever he needs to. He is a versatile person because what matters to him is who's in front of me. Who's in front of me? And whoever's in front of me, I'm going to create a bridge between me and them. You know, this is fascinating, some of the most recent research done in leadership has shown that the most successful and effective leaders that have the greatest, highest levels of loyalty from people, these leaders are what they call prototypical leaders. In other words, they are a prototype of the people they're leading. That the people who are led by them look at that leader and say, that leader is a representative of me. They represent who I am, not just what I do, of who I am. So that when you see this leader as a prototype of the people that they're leading, these people say, we want this person to lead us because that person is us. In many ways, they represent us. We know this, by the way. Studies have been done in political campaigns. The campaigns where leaders use the language of we and us more than I and me and my, those campaigns are far more successful when that person has the ability to show that I am merely a prototype of you. I'm a representative of you. And here's what Paul is saying. To the weak, I become weak. To the one under the law, I'm like one under the law. Though I'm not under the law, I'm going to become like one under the law. Right? I'm going to shift the gears and I'm going to be able to be what I need to be. That's the beauty of Christian maturity. It's having this ability to do this. Let me show you just a couple more quick ones. Go to Proverbs. You got to do Proverbs. Look at Proverbs 18. Proverbs 18. This is how important it is. Verse 21 says, death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. Think about that. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. Isn't that amazing? Think about that for a moment. What does that mean? What do you think that means?
Words kill and give life.
Boy, they give life and they can sure cause division. They can sure cause harm. They can cause death. That the way that I treat you, the way I speak to you, the way I connect with you, my words have the ability to bring forth life or death. Right? And when I begin to realize the sober reality of that, it really challenges me to seek wisdom. And how do I engage this person? And look, I know all of us are different. We all have different personalities. You know, Chris Wilson loves teaching servants by design. I teach a program called Social Style. Stacy and I will do that all over the place. I'm a firm believer that we all have different styles, that God has made us in certain ways. We all have certain patterns. Some of you are more analytical in how you think, and so you tend to be a little bit more kind of to yourself. You tend to be more of a thinker type. Others of you are gregarious and outgoing and sociable. Right? There's not a rock you haven't talked to. Right? Others of you are results-oriented and you're all about what's next, and time is everything. So you spend time on those things that have value to you and then you move on. Others of you are just kind of the nurturing, kind types that are just amazing listeners that will just have so much empathy for. We're all different, but we are called to be able to shift the gears in those worlds with wisdom whenever we need to, depending on who we're with. We're called not to just be a one-type type of person. We got to be able to be whatever that person is. I become all things to all men, that some might be saved. Look in the next chapter, chapter 27, Proverbs 27, verse 14. I've always loved this one. Chad, mark this one up. If one blesses his neighbor with a loud voice early in the morning, it will be counted a curse to him. Look at this. If one blesses his neighbor, write the word intent. That's the intent. Can you be well-intended? Yes. Most of us hopefully are well-intended. Okay? If one blesses his neighbor, intent, with a loud voice early in the morning, write the word ignorance. Okay? I'm not quite sure who I'm around. Who am I around? Hey, there's some people I can have a loud voice in the morning. I remember when early on, when Stacy and I got married, I remember one morning I was taking Nick and his best friend at the time, Lane, I was taking him to school up at Ryan. And, Nick is a quiet kid in the morning. Stacy's a quiet person in the morning. And I'm not. I mean, when I wake up, it's as if I've been up for all day. What's up, Chad? That's why Chad and I love each other. And I remember getting in the car, and we pick up Lane, and I remember I cranked up Striper. You may not even remember this, Nick. I cranked up Striper. To Hell with the Devil was the song, that old Christian metal band. Remember those guys? They look like Yellow Jackets, all dressed in black and yellow, leather. They're amazing, by the way. And I cranked up to hell. And I think I'm just being funny and cool and all that. It was all, Stacey's like, that was terrible. What are you doing? Just, that's not, they don't want that. Don't be so loud. Like, what do you mean? I'm just having fun. Like, no. And I mean, I've had to receive feedback about reading my audience. Who am I around? Right? And I still fail sometimes, many times. But we got to be good. But my intent is good, but it's ignorance is the problem. And here's the impact. It will be counted as a curse to him. There's the impact. Look, you may have the intent. I'm going to bless you. How are you going to bless me? I'm going to bless you by telling you the truth. See? But the outcome might be a curse. Because the way that I did it, though the intent is there, it might be that the way that I did it, I didn't take the time to really enter your world, to build a bridge of connection, to love you, to listen to you, to understand you before I bring the truth in, right? And so the proverb is telling us, be smart. Take more time to think. Who am I with? Who am I talking to? We need guidance. Be the kind of person. We need to all be the kind of person that can hear feedback from people, that lets people speak into our lives. And we need to be the kind of people that help challenge one another as iron sharpens iron. If I see that someone has a brother especially, has an obvious thing that could potentially get in their way, why would I not say something to my brother in love? Why would I not? Why would I let them go down the path of being a dull knife that's going to make them less effective in the long run? When what I want to do is try to help iron sharpening iron. If you guys see things in me, you have carte blanche, open season to say, hey, Walt, there's times that I've noticed, that I've seen, okay? And it doesn't mean we always have to accept what everybody says, but you have to have the humility to hear it and then make some phone calls. Hey, I got some feedback. Right? And I remember when Aaron told me that feedback, I remember I went to 2 or 3 people. I said, man, I got this feedback. In fact, I went to my office and I did a video about that. I was going to post it because I was so impacted. One, because I get so little feedback. Right? And I know I got problems. Don't give me a bunch of feedback now. See? I loved it. See, we got to be this way. We got to help each other out. Relational skills, man, it is at the heart. It is at the heart of what it means to be a leader, a Christ follower who seeks to make his name great, knowing how to engage each other. We're about to move into an election season. There's going to be some division There's going to be some tension, some animosity, some real strong opinions. And the way we manage ourselves is going to be all the difference between death and life in our relationships with them. All the difference between death and life. And I will tell you right now, there will not be a single election in this country that causes me to end my relationship with you, much less someone who doesn't know the Lord. Are you kidding me? And yet, our tradition bleeds this out, these divisions. And we've got to stop. We've got to stop.